Got my Motex set up. It's jumping up into position thanks to my plane effector and the linear field. And then I've got the secondary motion, this little bounce and jiggle going on, and that's thanks to my delay effector. So those are set up for each letter of my text. Here they are here, plane effector first, delay effector after. So this is all working well. What I want to do now is add some light so this looks a little better and get set up and ready to render this thing out. First thing I'm going to do, I might just shorten my animation a little because all the movement's finished by around about frame 70. So let's turn my number of frames down to 100. Just makes it a little shorter. Great. Now what I'm going to do for my lighting is I'm going to keep it really simple, and I'm just going to create a physical sky. A physical sky is a lighting system that emulates the sky in the real world. It's really good at just making nice, simple, natural light that casts shadows, and it's geographically accurate, so you can actually set it up to match the sun angle and the sky conditions if you were doing something like an architectural rendering or something that needed to be quite accurate in terms of seeing where light would fall and where shadows might fall. I'm just going to use it just as a general light source, so let's do that. In our Create menu, we can come to Physical Sky and just click on Physical Sky. And you'll see straight away I've got this gradient in the background. If I jump out of my camera and tumble my view around, we can see there's the sky, there's the horizon line. As I spin around, the sun is over that way. I can tell because there's a bright area in my sky. And the way the physical sky works, if we look at its settings, if we go to time and location, we can set an actual date and time. So today, now, what are we at? 3:30 and 2:30 in the afternoon. And I'm actually creating this from Christchurch in New Zealand. So if I go to Oceania, New Zealand, Christchurch, and this is setting up the sun conditions right now for where I am in the world. One thing you'll notice, if you grab your physical sky, there's a little icon for it in the middle of your world. If I just drag this out, now if we can get a better look at this, I don't know how well you can see here, but this is actually a compass. And it's labeled, there's south, there's north, there's west and east. So if you had, for example, a map graphic that you were creating in your 3D scene, maybe it was based on the real world, if you knew which way was north on your map, you could grab your physical sky and rotate it around on this axis and align it with your map so that the sun was actually in the physically correct position. The great thing about the physical sky as well is as you get closer to the evening or in the morning, let's just wind the sun down. We're getting down towards 5 o'clock, 6 p.m. We're getting golden hour now, which is that that hour before sunset where the light turns sort of orangey golden, and the physical sky will actually do that. So we start to get changes of color in our lighting. If we go right through to nighttime, we get actual night. These dots. Whoops. I'm accidentally copying my physical sky. Hit my finger on the wrong button there. These dots are little stars in the sky, so we've got a star field in the background. And then obviously if we were to, if we wanted to animate that time, for example, over time we'd start to see that the skies are lightening again, and here we are back into the morning of the next day. So this physical sky system is a great, very natural way of producing simple, really organic looking light in a 3D scene. Now the physical sky works well with the physical renderer. The physical renderer tries to sort of emulate the properties of light in the real world, and I generally use that for most of my rendering. So what I'm going to do is hit Command B to open up my render settings, and I'm just going to set up my physical renderer. In my render engine, I can choose which one I'm going to use. I'm going to use the physical renderer. I'm going to go down to the physical tab, and I'm going to just change some of these settings here to get the best look that I prefer to use out of this. What I like to do, the way I like to use this is I like to have the sampler as adaptive and the sampling quality I put on automatic. Now what these do, these create a combination of grain and anti-aliasing effects in your render, and this sampling error threshold, the lower this number is, the less grain and aliasing you'll get in your image. So basically the higher quality image you'll get. The lower this number, the higher the quality of the image. However, the lower this number is, the longer it will take for your render to finish. So this number here is always going to be a bit of a balance depending on what you need in an image. Often when I'm doing test renders, I'll set this value up really high, 70, 80, 90%, just so that I can really quickly churn through renders and just check that the overall look and the lighting is okay. When it comes to production time, you want to get this number down as low as possible. I sort of aim to get around 5%, but again, depending on how complex your scene is, how much time you've got available to render, you might want to just accept a little bit more grain in your image. Maybe you take it up to 10 or 15 or even 20, and that will mean that your images will render faster. But as I said, there's a little bit of a trade-off there with the image quality. So just for this test project, while I'm working on this, I'm going to leave this at 20%. Okay, so physical renderer, adaptive, automatic, 20%. Let's just check my output settings. I'm going to change this to full HD resolution, 1920 by 1080. As I said before, I work at 25 frames a second, so I'm going to change my frames per second to 25. And while I'm testing this, I just want to render the current frame. So that's pretty good. I'm happy with that. I can close that. What I like to do to test render my scenes is I like to use the picture viewer. It gives you a history of your test renders as you go along. I'll show you that in just a second. So what we're seeing here in the viewport while we work, this is only a preview of our final animation. We can see the physical sky icon, and we can see the camera lines and the grid. We don't want to see that stuff in our final render. We just want to see a nice sky background and our lit text. So to test what this looks like in our renderer, hit Shift R on your keyboard, and this will render your image to the picture viewer. And I like to use the picture viewer for rendering because it shows you your render time, how long it took. And when you're balancing up things like your sampling error threshold for your physical renderer, you can keep a track of what your render times are, and if you need to maybe adjust that to fit your render times within the space that you've got available for rendering. Okay, so what I can see here is here's the golden hour sun, or the horizon line in the background. I'm getting shadows on here. I've got little highlights on my beveled edges. Let's see what this looks like through my actual camera. Here's my camera. Let's look through there. And Shift R. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. What I might do is I might just adjust my time of day a little bit. I don't want it quite so orange. Let's have it a little bit more bluish as the sun comes up. Let's hit Shift R there. And again, what we can do with our picture viewer is we can just click on these different renders and we can compare them. I quite like this render better than the other one. I've got a little bit of shadowing coming in through in some of the details, and the highlights are a little more contrasty. And I like that one a little bit better, so I'll stick with that. Okay, so we've got camera, physical sky, we've got everything working there. It's looking pretty good. Okay, I'm going to render that sequence out. So to render the sequence, again, Command B, jump into your settings. I'm using a Mac, by the way. If you're using a PC, I guess it's Control B. I don't have one to check here, so I'm guessing it's Control B. Okay, so for my render settings, I'm going to leave this exactly the same. The only thing I'm going to change is my frame range. I'm going to render all my frames from 0 to 100. There we go. The other thing I want to do is I need to go into my save section and choose where I'm going to save all these individual frames. So I'm just going to make a folder on my desktop and render my frames into it. Obviously, when you're working on any kind of animation project, you want to have a well-organized folder structure set up. In my projects, I tend to have a folder for After Effects work, Premiere work. I have a folder for logos and artwork. I have a folder for sounds, another folder for documents, and anything else like that. So make sure you have a good folder structure set up. Just for this, because this is a test project I'm doing, I'm just going to make myself a folder on the desktop, and let's call this Mo Text. So that's the name of my folder. I'm going to call this MoText for my frame names as well. In terms of the file format, for basic projects, I work with PNG files, and I have alpha channels on my PNG files. I use PNGs for basic projects because they're compatible with PC or Mac, pretty much anything. They don't take up a lot of space, and they store an alpha channel, which is a transparency channel. For more complex projects that I work on, ones that are a bit more high-end, I use what's called an OpenEXR file format. That's a floating point file format. It's similar to sort of a raw file from a camera. There's a lot more color detail and tonal detail in an OpenEXR file. It's really good for compositing in After Effects. There's a bunch of little functions in After Effects that make this really useful. It does take up more space though. So just for basic projects, I just use a PNG file. So I've got my resolution, my frame rate, all my frames. I'm saving this. Physical. Tell you what I might do is I might just turn this, because this is such a short and simple animation, I'm going to turn this down to 5% for my rendering. I'm going to close that window now and just save my file. I should be saving these regularly. Save project as. Let's put it on the desktop in that MoText folder. And let's call this MoText1. Okay, so that's all set up and ready to go. All I need to do now is go to my render menu and add this scene to the render queue. Let's just delete, that's an old one from previously. So here's my render queue here. One thing I like to do as well is just double check before I render that I am actually using the camera in the scene and not the perspective view, which is called default camera, as opposed to camera default. A little confusing maybe, but make sure it's the one with the actual camera icon by it. It's a good idea to actually name your cameras. It's a good idea to name everything in your scene. But certainly get into the habit of naming your cameras, and when you set up a render, just double check that you are rendering the correct view. It's very easy to render a perspective view and not find out till a lot later on and have to re-render it. Okay, so ready to go. There's a little it's a film clapperboard icon. It might be a little hard to see. It's got a play arrow on it. Hit that and your Cinema 4D will start to render. As it starts to get through the frames, it will show you a little preview here. There's my first frame. All it shows is the background sky, which is what I would expect at the moment because the MoGraph characters haven't leapt up into the screen yet. So I'm going to leave that running. It says it's going to take about 15 minutes. I'm using a 4-year-old MacBook Pro, so this is a little slow. I'll finish up here, and then in the next one, in the next movie, we'll put this together in After Effects.